Hi, my name is Eda320, and I really like tanks. So much so, in fact, that I've decided to embark on a journey across the internet and gaming world alike to find some of the wackiest, coolest, and best-made tanks in video games. I'll be looking at everything from the plausibly realistic to the downright insane.
To summarize, this is really cool to see them actually model early style, mid style, and then late style, especially for an RTS. I mean, that doesn't really need to be that attentive to detail, but they are. They've even modeled the serial numbers on the VVSS bogies themselves, on the armored housings for the bogies. I, Eda320, am impressed with these Sherman models.
So if this sounds like something you're interested in, stick around and listen up, because this is a Tank Enthusiast Reacts to Tanks in Video Games.
Greetings. Welcome back, one and all, to yet another episode of everyone's favorite series, Tank Enthusiast Reacts, where today I'm going to be taking a look at one of my personal favorite games of all time, actually. Not Men of War Assault Squad 2, but rather its sequel-ish game. There were a couple games that came out after Men of War Assault Squad 2, between now and then, but anyway, Gates of Hell Ostfront, or Call to Arms Gates of Hell Ostfront. There's a lot to this franchise, but yeah, Men of War Assault Squad 2, which is kind of the predecessor to this game, is one of my favorite real-time strategy games of all time, full stop. I have so many amazing memories of playing that game at late night with my friends, and I think playing that game is one of the reasons why I got into World War II history in the first place, and then started thinking about how, like, tanks are super cool. That game was pretty important for me, I would dare say. And I can also say that Gates of Hell Ostfront, or Call to Arms Gates of Hell Ostfront, is a worthy sequel. So worthy, in fact, that I'm making a video on it. But not just that, but it's also actually one of my most recommended episodes. It's this and Company of Heroes 2 is actually, weirdly enough, like the two most requested games for me to do a Tank Enthusiast React on. So I guess that's gonna happen at some point. Oh, Foxhole as well. Anyways, point being, I play this game all the frickin' time, so it was not hard for me to get footage for this. And there's actually almost too much footage. I don't even know where to stop or where to begin. So I guess we'll just get on with this. But before we do, I'm obligated to say that if you enjoy this video, make sure to come back and leave a like and subscribe. And if you care to, join my Patreon as well. All of your money goes back into the channel, helping fund it, buy new cameras, buy books for research, everything. Every little bit helps. I want to shout it out at first, just get it out of the way, before we get to what you are really here for, the tanks. So the way I wanted to structure this Tank Enthusiast Reacts was for me to just hop into a match of the Conquest game mode. For this episode, I'm going to try my best to cover every playable nation in the game at the moment. Starting with the United States, which is the most recent nation to be added as of the making of this video in the massive Liberation DLC where they add the Western Front. And right away you can see how extensive the research tree is, particularly in the Sherman department, which you all know makes me very happy. But the first tank we're going to look at here is not a Sherman, or, well, actually it kind of is. The M36 Jackson. This is particularly just a normal M36 Jackson, not a B1 or B2 variant. M36 is quite literally just a modified M10 to take the 90mm gun. The M10 in and of itself was kind of a stopgap vehicle. Basically for tank destroyers, the Americans come up with the M3 half-track. First of all, is just saying, let's just get a anti-tank gun onto a mobile platform and throw it out there. And then once that's out the door, the immediate thinking is let's put a 3-inch gun onto an M3 Lee. Some prototypes are built, they're not all of that good, but then the Sherman becomes a thing, and it's decided, okay, let's try putting it onto a Sherman. That ends up working pretty well, but there's a fundamental flaw in the design philosophy, so to speak, because American tank destroyers in the doctrine is supposed to be fast. They're supposed to be this quick reaction force. They're supposed to be like defensive interceptors. And when you plonk a 3-inch gun onto a Sherman chassis, there's not much that's fast about that. So the immediate solution to shed weight was to shed armor. The M10 comes out, has some compromises, has a funky turret, no traverse motor, it's a manual crank traverse. They try to work on the M10, improve it just a little bit. One of the main things they do is they switch from using the M4A2 Sherman as a chassis. So the original M10 is developed with the twin 6046 General Motor engines, the diesel engines. And then later on towards the end of its life, they come up with the M10A1, which is an M10 but powered by the Ford GAA, the gasoline engine. But the M10A1 is never actually used in combat. They're all kept in the backlines in America for training. And then inevitably, in the middle of the war period, America starts asking around about a 90mm cannon. America did a whole bunch of stuff in during World War II just to see if it was worth doing, even if there was no immediate demand for it. And any mid-war experimentation with a 90mm gun is one of those things that nobody was asking for it, but they kept thinking, what if we, what if, what would happen, you know? Like, I'm feeling a bit quirky tonight, you know, busting it down sexual style. What if Quirked Up White Boy just kind of started cooking? And so they would cook. They develop a new turret, and we get basically what you see here. It is type classified right before D-Day in 1944, and initially they are all built conversions from the M10A1. So all of those M10 tanks that were built using the 4GAA engine that were left back in America, they took the M10A1 and then just ripped the turret off, put the new turret with the 90, changed the ammunition racks, did all what they needed to do. And that was the M36. An order is made for, I think it was a 1,400 M36s. They start producing the turrets, because the turrets is the new component here. So they go hunting for M10A1s, and then they go building new turrets. They build the 1,400 turrets that they need, but they can only turn up about 900 or so M10A1s. So they have a bunch of turrets left over. What they end up doing with those is just plonking them onto regular old M4A3 Sherman chassis, and that ends up being the M36 B1. I still could not tell you to this day why they chose B1 instead of like A1 or A2 or A3, but they do. So the M36 B1 is mechanically identical to a normal M36, and then now that they've run out of M10 A1s to turn into M36s, they start turning back to regular M10 production, which remember was using the twin diesel engine. And so then they just start grabbing those hulls and then make M36s out of those, and those become M36 B2. So, with that being said, we can use that knowledge to identify what model of the M36 we are currently looking at. And based on what I'm seeing here, this is a genuine M36. It looks like it's got engine deck hatches of the 4GAA, and even seeing inside the engine deck, actually really cool, you can see the engine in there, and it looks to me like they've tried to model an actual 4GAA, which is pretty cool attention to detail. So this is a genuine M36. That exhaust does not look right to me. That looks like an M4A2's exhaust. Supposed to be the same exhaust as an M4A3, because using the 4GAA, but that has the exhaust of the M4A2, which is the twin diesel. They actually got the engine and the engine deck correct, but this exhaust is the exhaust of an M4A2 Sherman, so the exhaust on this model is actually wrong. And we also have an M36 B1, which, yep, this should be a box standard 4GAA M4A3 Sherman tank. We don't have M36 B2 in this game. I totally understand that, because for video games purposes, they are identical. The only difference is the mechanics. So yeah, they got the exhaust correct on the M36 B1, where again, this would also still be using a 4GAA. And it's important to remember that the M10 and the M36 are both built on the Sherman's hull. Like, the whole point was just they took a Sherman and just redid the armor profile, but especially automotive components, things like exhaust and the rear hatches on the back and everything should be damn near identical. So it is worth noting that those things do line up, and when they don't line up, it's worth pointing out. So yeah, on this M36 B1 we can see here, which again should have the same automotive components as the M36 we just saw, the exhaust is different. Otherwise, yeah, not much else to say. Like this, the M36 B1 is literally just an M36, but on an actual Sherman. By the way, if you really want like a super awesome and deep dive on the M36, you really should go check out Red Wrench's video, because it's incredible. And we have the M8 so-called Scott tank, or a howitzer plonked onto a Stuart chassis, an M5 Stuart chassis. And yeah, we can once again see inside the Stuart engine bay there, we can actually see the twin Cadillac engines that that the Stuarts were all powered by. The original variants of the Stuart were powered by the R975 Wright or Continental engines. In order to find more engines, because those Wright R975 engines were needed for, well, first of all, Sherman production. This engine was super widely used, and they needed these engines for a lot of things. So that's the big driving force behind why we develop new engines to put into American tanks. And we find all sorts of solutions. We find the 4GAA, we find the twin diesels, we find the Chrysler Multibank, and for things like the Stuart, the twin Cadillac engines are developed. And yes, fun fact, Cadillac did produce the Stuart. And we finally get to everyone's favorite part, the Shermans. First thing out of the way here, and just say that I am very impressed with the way they modeled the Shermans in this game, and also the sheer variety in Shermans that we have in this game. Dare I say, there are almost too many Shermans with way too minute differences that sometimes it actually feels kind of redundant. The M4 early, the M4 early with armor, the M4 mid, the M4 late, the M4A1 early, the M4A1 with add-on armor, the M4A1 mid, the M4A1 late, the M4A3 early, the M4A3 early with armor. The detail on these tanks is so good that I'm actually having to go back through and I'm really nitpicking things, such as the right rear tow hook is where the hull serial number was always stamped. If you ever go visit a Sherman in a museum, go ahead around back and check on the right rear tow hook and see if you can spot the serial number. It might be faded away from time, but it should still be there. But in the preview I have in front of me right now, it's not there. So boo, model sucks. Between each of the different variants, M4, M4A1, M4A2, M4A3, we should be seeing similar characteristics between them all. So like an early model M4 should be about the same in terms of external features as an early model M4A1. The only difference is the hull that they're mounted on. So for example, that early style M34 gun mantlet, the early style cupola, small hatch hull, usually a 3-piece transmission case. This is a mistake that I did make on my slightly confusing guide to the Sherman, where I said that the M4 was introduced late enough into production that it did not see the 3-piece transmission. That is not true. I'm sorry that I lied to all of you. You can go ahead and hang me by the neck until I am dead for that. But fuck you, I say what I want. Even going through the efforts of replicating those weld patterns that I talked about in the Tank Enthusiast Reacts to World of Tanks video, where you can tell what factory the Sherman came out of based on its weld pattern and based on the model. What's also really cool is these early tanks have the 50 cal mounted on a pintle mount in front of the commander's cupola, and then as you go later down the line, now the 50 moves to the rear of the turret. We can see with the M4 late model, you've got the full M34A1 gun mantlet, you've got the applique armor, both the applique armor on the cheeks, of the tank, which is where they had to grind down the inside wall of the turret to fit the turret traverse mechanism, which, by the way, the Soviets also had to do on the T-34, if I'm not mistaken, on that 85mm turret. They made up on that armor by having the turret walls itself bulge outwards in the casting, rather than adding an applique sheet of armor like America does. We have now the one-piece transmission housing, or differential housing more specifically, but the transmission is also connected to it, so you can take that off and the transmission comes out with it. But it's also commonly called the differential housing, because that's really what's right there is the differential. Tank Mechanics Simulator actually has a really interesting view of that. But because it's an M4 and just sort of the box standard M4 chassis is a bit neglected, and they don't really develop a proper late version of it until the M4 105 becomes a thing. And the only real tanks that used the late model M4 chassis were the M4 105s. A couple of them did exist, but there were very few. It was like 11 were made, and they don't survive to this day. Of like box standard normal M4s that had the large hatch front plate with no driver's hoods, all the proper fits and fixings of the sort of the late model Shermans. Oh, Edda, you're rambling. And the M4A1 has the exact same variants that the M4 has, M4A1 early, M4A1 early with armor, and then M4A1 late. Again, all the same features, looking really good, and then even going so far as to include the 76mm variants, and they do early and late versions of that as well, which is interesting and usually not something people go through the effort of doing. On the M4A1, you can even see on the front the General Steel casting, the General Steel logo in the casting. This is actually something that is a common myth that even I fell for. I used to think that the G in that logo on the center of a casted hull M4A1 meant that it was a Grizzly, G for Grizzly, and that I would use to denote a Grizzly tank. Montreal Locomotive Works.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
That is incorrect. It is actually just the generic logo for the General Steel Casting Company. General Steel did provide all of the casted hulls for the Grizzlies. However, there are also American original Shermans, not Grizzlies, but American Sherman tanks that also had their hulls provided to them from General Steel. Again, it's a square is a rectangle, but rectangle isn't a square kind of thing. Like, just because it has the G doesn't mean it's a Grizzly, but every single Grizzly does have the G. The true identifier of a Sherman Grizzly is the sprocket. That's how you can really tell. So, to summarize, this is really cool to see them actually model early style, mid style, or as they call in the game, early style with applique armor, and then late style. And they are accurate. They are bang on accurate, I would say, especially for an RTS. I mean, that doesn't really need to be that attentive to detail, but they are. They even go as far as to model the different road wheels, spoked road wheels, and then as production goes, you got the solid road wheels. You also have solid road wheels with like casted spokes in the solid road wheel frame. They've even modeled the serial numbers on the VVSS bogies themselves, on the armored housings for the bogies, and serial numbers on the turrets, serial numbers on the suspension arms, the different sprocket models, the different idler models. It seems to me like they understand the evolution of the Sherman, and they tried their best to categorize the evolution of the Sherman. I think for an RTS game, and for everything that this game is, and for everything this game's trying to do, I think they did a bang-on job. They even got, on the front of the field mod, the M4A3 HVSS field mod Sherman, they even got the correct American-style jerry cans. For those who don't know, obviously, jerry cans, this huge thing, revolution in the fuel and water transportation industry. Germans invent the jerry can. It's super useful. It's got 3 handles. It can be carried by multiple people. It's got the seal lining on the inside that makes it so you can put water in it, you can put fuel in it, you can put oil in it. Doesn't matter. It's not going to rust. Well-built cans. They're like super incredibly useful. The British come across the jerry can in North Africa and they'd say, bloody hell, these things are freaking amazing, man. And so they grab them and they reuse them. And then they start license producing, as if they bought a license from the Germans to do it. They steal the design and they produce it domestically. The British copy of the jerry can is pretty much bang on, almost indistinguishable from the German ones. They are just as good. They're amazing. The Americans catch wind of this whole jerry can thing, probably through the British, if I had to guess. And the Americans say, right, we should make our own copy of the jerry can since these things seem so useful. And the Americans kinda whiff it. They're not quite as high quality. American jerry cans didn't quite have as many of like the neat, fun features. There's actually an entire video of a guy who like autistically breaks down the history of the jerry can. If you'd like to watch it, I'll leave a link to the description below, and you can go watch that video and then correct all the things that I got wrong trying to cite that video, because I'm not gonna claim to be a jerry can expert. But from what I know, American jerry cans were actually not very good during World War II, and the British copies were better. One of the few things, especially in terms of logistics, that the Americans got wrong during World War II, where I'm bringing all of that up, is that on this M4A3 76W HVSS, they actually got the correct model of specific American-style jerry cans. I think that is worth pointing out. Then we have a 76 Jumbo, looks amazing, and the weld seam on the side of the hull. Am I gonna have to make an entire video now dedicated to going to different games and seeing their interpretations of the Sherman Jumbo and seeing if I can find the weld seam? And it's gonna be like assigning points to which games portray the weld seam and which ones don't. Yeah, just showing off some of the awesome direct control capabilities that are in this game. I love this. This is something that you used to always be able to like take control of your units in like the Men of War series and whatnot, take direct control, but now they've really brought it to a new level where when you control your units, you hop into them as if it's like a third-person shooter. And there's even some mods you can get for Gates of Hell where that makes it into first-person. But yeah, and you can operate every individual gun on the tank. You can take control of the bow gun. You can take control of the top machine guns. You can take control of everything. You can deploy smoke. I mean, literally, like at times, it's like playing War Thunder. And then even, I have to shout this out, on this 76 Sherman we're driving here, the scope reticle is accurate. And even when you back out a zoom level, the optic is on the right side of the barrel where the gunner was on the Sherman, and it's like above the barrel. Like this is the proper position for the gunner's sight on a 76mm Sherman. It's in the right place and the reticle's correct. I can't ask for any more. Like, that's awesome. Pershing, finally moving away from Shermans. Oh, wow, hold on, there's actually other tanks in this game. Pershing, super well modeled. Yeah, this is essentially all the build-up to everything that the Americans have been experimenting in the war on improvements to the Sherman, most notably the lower profile, better suspension, better armor, bigger gun, everything they had been wanting to do with the Sherman since it was released. I mentioned before in the World of Tanks video that there's a lot of back and forth about whether the Pershing is really worth it. I recommend you check out a lot of the Chieftain's videos on the Pershing. He really goes into the deep history of it, why it was in development hell, why they decided to build it in the first place, and all these slow features, all the slow build-up that leads to all the small things that come together and amalgamate to the Pershing. We do get a glance at Super Pershing. The model looks incredible right here. But yeah, Super Pershing starts life as this T26E4, which is this upgrade of Super Pershing to use the longer T15 gun, if I'm not mistaken. They test this concept on a previously used chassis for a T26E1-1, and that was a prototype to test something else. They ripped the gun off it, and they put in the long T15 90mm cannon, the longer, bigger 90. They put those assisting springs on the turret, and that becomes like the first real T26E4. It's a confusion because it still says T26E1-1 on the turret. They took an experimental tank and then made a new experimental tank out of it. So they just didn't erase the T26E1-1 moniker on the turret. I don't know why. The moment they put the gun in there, they called it T26E4. And then once they build that one pilot vehicle, go out and say, hey, this T26E4 thing is viable. We would like to order, I think, 20 or maybe a little bit less, and they build more. They keep them around in America for testing. The original T26E4 that is built on that E1-1 pilot vehicle is sent overseas. Not part of the Zebra program. I got that mixed up. Zebra program was a different thing, or the Zebra initiative. That was just for regular Pershings. The Super Pershing was sent over just on its own. That was just its own initiative. Belton Cooper gets his hands on it, him and his crew, and then they add on armor packages, and T26E4 becomes proper Super Pershing. We encounter a Panther and we're having trouble killing it, so we do what the Americans probably actually would have done in real life. Air superiority is a wonderful thing. And the Pershing's mortal enemy, the Tiger II. This is correctly noted as a Panzerkampfwagen 6 Ostfront B. The Tiger II was never actually given like a separate Panzer designation. Like the Tiger was the Panzerkampfwagen 6, and then H1, later renamed to E. But the Tiger II was not like the Panzerkampfwagen 7. The Tiger II was the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Ostfront B. Even though it is a totally different tank in terms, like it is a complete redesign of the Tiger, it is still, for whatever reason, not given a new Panzer designation. It is just an Ostfront B. It's just a variant B on the Tiger. Also, in parentheses, they note early. And the reason this is early mostly because of the turret, what is frequently called the Tiger P. And again, I have to clear up this confusion because if I don't, people will yell at me in the comments and think that I don't know this. But guys, I think this is one of those things that everyone knows it, but I have to say it because if I don't say it, people in the comments will think that I don't know. The P in Tiger P does not stand for Porsche. Everyone thinks the P means the Porsche turret, that the early Tiger IIs used the Porsche turret. To clear this up, I am like the 9 millionth YouTuber to do this, by the way, so I'm not blazing any new ground here. Any video you watch on the Tiger II within the last 15 years will tell you this. Porsche had nothing to do with the design of the turret. Porsche and Henschel were both contracted to design the hull. The turret was predetermined. The turret was already made by Krupp. Krupp manufactured all turrets on all tanks for Germany in all of World War II. This is the exact same thing that happened with the Tiger I. Again, Krupp built the turret to put the 88 into it. Krupp had the turret, and then they went to Henschel Porsche and said, build us a hull. Well, when the Tiger II comes around, it's literally round 2. So they come out with this new turret, this P early production turret, and funny enough, it's the exact same thing again. Porsche literally resubmits his homework. I mean, it's edited, it's a bit different, but still. And surprise, surprise, it doesn't get accepted. And Henschel, again, sticks with something a lot more conventional, and surprise, surprise, Henschel wins again. So not only does Porsche have nothing to do with the turret of Tiger II, but also Porsche was contracted for the hull, which is not the turret, and even then, Porsche didn't even win. So Porsche has literally nothing to do with the Tiger II. There is not an ounce of Tiger II that Ferdinand Porsche put his fingers on, as far as I know. Someone gets going to be like, the periscope design was taken from one of Porsche's prototypes. I don't know. As far as I know, Porsche had nothing to do with the Tiger II. Oh yeah, and you can tell the early turret design by those curvy front cheeks that very much are begging for shot traps. So in the future, they make the cheeks flat actually, and they make them way thicker. The Marder III, specifically the Marder III Ostfront M. Marder is essentially just a series of German tank destroyers. Germany actually starts out the war very, very similar to the United States in terms of how they think about tank destroyers. The Germans look at particularly experience in the Spanish Civil War, which, by the way, the Spanish Civil War is super underrated in terms of how important and influential it was to tank development for everyone. I mean, specifically the Germans and the Soviets, but then what the Germans and the Soviets learn bleeds into a lot of other nations. In the Spanish Civil War, both the Soviets and the Germans learn one of the most effective weapons against a tank is, surprise, surprise, an anti-tank gun. The towed anti-tank gun has a lot of advantages, because at this time we're talking about 37 and 45 caliber guns. The towed anti-tank gun was light and fast, it could be relocated very easily, and they were, most notably, super easy to hide, because they were very low profile, and you could cake them in bushes or whatever, and they were very good at getting just cheap, easy shots in on tanks. So the Germans look at that and say, okay, that's actually pretty sick. What if we found a way to take a towed anti-tank gun and plonk it onto a more mobile chassis, something that can move faster than the man can push? That's why the Americans specifically refer to their tank destroyers as gun motor carriages. They're not tanks. All we're doing is we're taking a towed anti-tank gun and putting it onto a mobile chassis. The Americans just so happen to have thought that doing so on a turret was most beneficial. Another advantage to that is that that's super cheap. So, after they conquer France, actually after they conquer Poland, after Germany conquers people, they have a habit of taking a lot of their tanks that they steal from these nations they conquer and either pushing them into service themselves or, most often, converting them into these tank destroyers where we rip off the turret, we'll open up the top of the hull, and then we'll take a towed anti-tank gun and plonk it on top. In some cases, that is literally what they do. Oftentimes, though, it does involve at least some remanufacturing where you build some super thin superstructure on top and you plonk a big gun on it. And the Germans did this with pretty much every single tank they ever got their hands on. The Marder I series was mostly converted French tanks, either artillery tractors or actual like R-35s and whatnot. Marder IIs are built on the Panzer II. That's an easy one to remember because Marder II, Panzer II. Most Marder IIs are built on the Panzer IV-F, or Panzer II-F, but every now and then, and as I've called out in previous videos, they also built Marder IIs on the Panzer II-Ds, which was a short run of Panzer IIs with torsion bar suspension, not interleaved road wheels, but just normal torsion bar suspension. And the Panzer II-Ds were built as regular Panzer IIs, but then they end up getting called back, and then all of them are converted into Marder II-Ds. And then the Marder III is specifically built on Czech vehicles, even more specifically the 38T, and you can clearly see this is a 38T with the turret ripped off. The original Marder IIIs used stolen Soviet 76mm cannons, because also the Germans would capture a lot of tank guns, again in France. When they conquer Czechoslovakia, they get the 4.7, when they conquer France, they get a bunch of guns, and when they invade Russia, they get a lot of anti-tank guns. And so the original were stolen Soviet 76 guns plonked onto these chassis, and then they do the Pak 40, and then they do this, the Marder III Ostfront M, which is by far the most produced variant of the Marder III. Placement of everything is a bit different. They move the superstructure a bit further backwards. They change some things about it, they make it better. And you can see in the game, they even have modeled normal 38Ts as well. And they actually have, I don't really show it in the game, but they have Ostfront like A all the way through Ostfront G in Gates of Hell Ostfront, and it's really cool to see them evolve. They even have the 35, I'm pretty sure, in Gates of Hell. They do. You can really see on this Marder II model as well, you can clearly see it's got Panzer II suspension, it's built on a Panzer II. You can literally see that this gun in this tank still has the gun shields from what it would have if it was in a towed anti-tank gun roll. It's like literally all they're doing is they're just ripping off those legs and then just sticking it onto these chassis. But also would love to call out the interior modeling. You can even see the driver's seat down there underneath the gun and all that. Really, really cool attention to detail on these tanks. Yeah, German Panzerjägers and Marders and all these things are really wacky because, yeah, it's really just all the kinds of different guns they can get their hands on and all different kinds of hulls they can get their hands on and mixing and matching. Like, pretty much any combination of towed gun and stolen tank that you can think of, the Germans probably made one. Oh yeah, cool little gameplay cameo of a Panzerkampfwagen 3. The flamethrower, the Flammpanzer, military history visualized, has a video on Flammpanzers, and in the German experience, Flammpanzers were of very limited use. Generally speaking, you have to get pretty close, especially as far as like tank distances are concerned. You have to get pretty close to be able to use a flamethrower, and the Germans found that oftentimes the tanks would have to get really close to the enemy, and then as soon as they revealed that they were flamethrower tanks, they were instantly targeted by everyone, and they usually didn't last very long. You know, when they worked, but oftentimes they didn't work. Hi there, Trucker Edda interjecting at the end of this video. As you may notice by the timestamp and the way your YouTube red bar is currently moving, the video is coming to an end. Well, that's because I had originally planned to cover every single nation in one video, but of course, that is a lot, and I tend to ramble for a very, very, very long time. So during production of this video, I realized that I was probably gonna have to make this a two-parter. So I put a vote on my Discord, and people seemed okay with it. So that's exactly what's happening. This video has been cut into two parts. This was part one, exploring the United States and German tanks that are currently in the game, and the next video we are going to see the Soviet Union and Finland, which has been a really, really fun nation to do research on for this video, and to present for this video, or well, for the next video for part 2. So if you like what you saw, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe so you're notified when part 2 of this video series comes out. This is the first ever Tank Enthusiast Reacts video that I've done that has had to been split into a two-parter, but I really think it's worth it, and hopefully you guys do too. If you haven't already, join my Discord and be notified when I go live. Also, if you care to, check out my second channel, Edda 320 Live, where I go live at least twice a week. I try 3 times a week, and we stream all sorts of games, and it's a ton of fun. You are pro-gay and a pro-femboy? I am a professional femboy. And look, just because I'm a professional femboy doesn't mean I am a femboy. It just means I'm a professional, you know? Those who can't do, teach. Otherwise, I'm just gonna leave it here and keep this outro short and sweet. And thank you again so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in part 2. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.